Everybody, Dr. Price here. We're going to talk about the plot of A Christmas Carol today. So I'm just preparing to share my screen with you, and that is what I think I've just done now. So before we start, it's really important to remember that whilst it's important to know the plot of any text that you're studying, in this case a novel, it's not enough on its own to just know the plot. So everything that I'm going to say in this video, you need to remember that you have to be able to link it to a theme or a character's development or the context of the novel. Obviously, there's already a video that I've made about the context of Christmas Carol, and I'm going to make some more on themes and characters in the coming weeks. So please just remember this as we go through it. And the theme that I'm going to be focusing on as I talk through the plot is Scrooge's redemption. So that's to do with his character development too. But the idea of redemption and being saved from a terrible fate is a key theme in A Christmas Carol. In brief, A Christmas Carol is the story of Scrooge's redemption. He changes from being a selfish, cruel and bitter man who only cares about himself and his money into a kind-hearted, generous man who's concerned about everyone around him. The reason he changes is because of the intercession of a series of ghosts who show him the error of his ways. So A Christmas Carol is a ghost story, but it's not a typical ghost story. The aim of the story isn't to frighten the reader, it's to show the reader the message that the poor aren't being looked after well enough in Dickens's time, especially in London, and that he believes that individuals are able to have an impact on the lives of other people through their actions and especially through their generosity. So we'll have a look at stave one. This stave is called Marleys Ghost. We meet Scrooge at the beginning of the novel in his counting house. That's a sort of Victorian term for his office, and it's Christmas Eve. We see Scrooge contrasted with a series of much more sympathetic and, for want of a better word, nice characters. So to begin with, he's visited by his nephew Fred. Fred invites him over for Christmas dinner, and Scrooge is quite rude and refuses. He's also visited by two portly gentlemen collecting for charity, and specifically they're trying to collect money for the poor so that they can provide the poor with some food at Christmas time. So we learn from these encounters that Scrooge isn't a very sociable person. We learn that particularly through his rudeness to Fred and to the two portly gentlemen as well. And he also lacks generosity when we see that he refuses to donate any money to charity. Scrooge says he does enough by paying his taxes, and that's all that he should be required to contribute. We also see a contrast between him and his clerk, Bob. So Bob is the person who does his office work, basically. And Bob seems like quite a humble person. We don't get much of a sense of his personality here, but he seems like a fairly nice man, a family man. And Scrooge is very begrudging about giving Bob the day off for Christmas Day. He allows it, but he makes it very, very clear that Bob has to be in all the earlier the day after Christmas, and that he doesn't like it, that he's having to pay him without getting a day's work from him. So after we see these encounters in the counting house, Scrooge heads home, and just before he enters his house, he's on his doorstep, and the door knocker of his house is changed into the ghostly face of his old friend and business partner, Jacob Marley. So obviously this unnerves Scrooge, but he goes inside. And that's when Marley's ghost eventually visits Scrooge. Scrooge sort of gets himself settled, and Marley's ghost appears. To begin with, Scrooge refuses to believe that what he is seeing is a ghost. He says it must be that he's eaten something and it's made him feel a little bit strange. But he slowly begins to accept the reality of what he is seeing through the things that Jacob is saying. And this scares Scrooge. So we already see in stave 1 the beginnings of a change in Scrooge. We see this very hard, cold man right at the beginning of stave 1, but we see someone who becomes more fearful towards the end of stave 1. Now, Marley's there with a message. He warns Scrooge that he has to change his ways, and that if he doesn't change his ways, he's going to be doomed to be a ghost himself. Scrooge, that is going to be doomed to be a ghost, and he will spend the rest of eternity roaming the earth, trying to make up for his misdeeds in life, particularly his greed and his selfishness. This is what Jacob Marley is having to do after having passed a life that was quite greedy and selfish. And he's there to give Scrooge a warning that it doesn't have to be this way. Marley says that Scrooge is going to be visited in the coming nights by 3 different ghosts who will help him see the error of his ways. And then Marley disappears and Scrooge goes to the window and sees that the sky is filled with hundreds of ghosts that are all sort of wailing and dragging heavy chains. And the chains are obviously symbols of the bad deeds that these people sort of committed in life. So Scrooge sees that and his fear multiplies. Then he wakes up with the tolling of a bell. He thinks he must have slept through the day. And it's night again. A bell is tolling and another ghost appears. So it's the first of the 3 spirits that Marley's ghost said would come. This is the ghost of Christmas past. And he appears, he's quite a strange figure. He appears both young and old at the same time. And he also looks quite similar to a candle. So he's emitting light. Light is coming out of him and he sort of shines. The ghost tells Scrooge that he's there for Scrooge's own welfare, to help save him from the terrible fate that Marley has predicted. And he takes Scrooge to various scenes from his life in the past. So Scrooge sees his school days when he was quite lonely and quite sad, and he sees his sister Fan, who he was very fond of. He sees his apprenticeship with Fezziwig. This is the time that appears to have been the happiest of Scrooge's life. We see the Christmas party that Fezziwig held for his employees every Christmas Eve, and Scrooge looks really happy and looks like he's really in the Christmas spirit, which is obviously a huge contrast to the way that he's portrayed in stave 1. We also meet Scrooge's fiancée, Belle, and we see Belle ending her engagement to Scrooge. And the reason she gives is that he's become too fond of money. He's become too obsessed with the amount of money he has. And this isn't the Scrooge that she originally knew. We're not really certain what happened to Scrooge to make this, to affect this change. But we do see that he has begun to change. Now, we see Scrooge showing some different emotions in this stave. In stave 1, obviously, as we've said, he starts off quite a grumpy man, quite selfish. And by the end of stave 1, we see someone who is fearful and scared. But in stave 2, we see what Scrooge had been like in the past. And that was that sometimes he was quite happy, but we also see sadness in his life. We might be given a hint that the sadness that he experienced, particularly with his fiancée ending the engagement, may have made him even more selfish and greedy. But we know that that aspect of his personality was beginning to make itself known when he was still engaged to Belle. So then that ghost leaves him, and in stave 3, the ghost of Christmas present arrives. So he's very different to the ghost of Christmas past in appearance. He's a giant. He's a very jolly character, a little bit like what we might expect Santa Claus to look like. He's dressed in a green robe and he's wearing a crown of holly. So he seems all ready to enjoy Christmas. And in this part of the novel, we're not really reflecting on Scrooge's life, but we're seeing something of the lives of people around Scrooge. So this is particularly the Cratchit family. To begin with, the Ghost of Christmas Present shows us Christmas scenes on the streets of London. We particularly focus on shops, and we look at the abundance of food in the shops, and it's portrayed in a really, really positive, almost joyful way. We see the joy of people as well, just really happy that it's Christmas, and we see the joy of the Cratchits. So obviously we've already met Bob Cratchit, who is Scrooge's clerk, but then we get to meet the rest of the family. This is a family that don't have very much money, but they're very happy. They've experienced hardships in life, not only because they're not very rich, but also because their son Tim is very ill. It's not really specified what illness Tim has, but it's severe enough to have disabled him. But despite the challenges the Cratchits have faced, they're very happy because they're getting to spend Christmas together. Mrs. Cratchit is really keen to provide a wonderful Christmas for her husband and her children. And even though they don't have loads and loads of food, the family is just really, really happy to be together and to be enjoying something special. Once Scrooge has visited the Cratchits, we see some other scenes as well that aren't of huge relevance to Scrooge's character development, but then we see him go to Fred's house, his nephew, and he's seeing the Christmas day that he himself could have joined in with if he had agreed to accept the invitation that Fred offered. I'm really sorry about the absolutely terrible apostrophe error in the second to last bullet point. There should not be an apostrophe in the word visits. My only defence is that I made these slides when I was very tired, so I'm sorry about that. But apostrophe crimes aside, Scrooge learns that the people at Fred's house are having a really great time, sort of at Scrooge's expense, because they're laughing about Scrooge. They're laughing about what a horrible person he is. But despite this, he still wishes that he was there himself. And again, we see more of a change in Scrooge by stave 3. We see him express sympathy and concern for Tim and for the Cratchits more generally. And we see him sort of express a sadness that he's missing out on a happy Christmas day with Fred. Right at the end of stave 3, the Ghost of Christmas Present shows Scrooge these two children who he calls ignorance and want. And these children are symbols of man's neglect for his fellow man. And it's very targeted at Scrooge. The ghost quotes back some things that Scrooge said about poverty to the two portly gentlemen. And he does that with the aim of making Scrooge feel bad about his attitudes towards the poor. But the reader is left in no doubt that these figures, ignorance and want, are the result of people like Scrooge having power. So then we move on to the final spirit in stave 4. This is the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. And again, he's very different in appearance and personality to the two ghosts that have come before him. He's a dark hooded figure. He is the scariest in appearance of all the phantoms. Scrooge definitely expresses the most fear towards this ghost. And he also doesn't speak, in contrast to the others. So the others have had conversations with Scrooge, but this ghost merely guides him. And I think the lack of speech is another thing that creates fear around this particular ghost. We might say that the model of this ghost is the idea of the Grim Reaper, so a symbol of death. And for obvious reasons, this scares Scrooge quite a lot. So this ghost shows Scrooge scenes from the future, and he sees mainly two different things. He sees some scenes where people are being really rude about a man who has recently passed away. So there's some people picking over this person's possessions and working out what they can sell and being quite rude about the person who's recently died. And we also see some businessmen who are discussing someone that they knew who passed away, but they show him nothing but contempt. There's absolutely no sympathy for this man, no kindness shown towards this man who's died. And the reader is meant to be a little bit shocked because obviously in Dickens's time as now, we tend not to speak about someone who's recently died in a cold, cruel way. But this is what Scrooge is seeing. And then the ghost shows them the Cratchits' home. And Scrooge learns that Tim has died. This really upsets Scrooge because what he saw with the Ghost of Christmas Present really affected him. And he had developed a fondness for Tim in seeing his struggles and seeing how cheerfully Tim dealt with his struggles. Right at the end of the stave, we see Scrooge at his own gravestone, and Scrooge realises that the person that the people earlier on in this stave were talking about was him. He realises that if he doesn't change his ways, he's going to die someone who nobody mourns and nobody feels sad about. So then we get onto the final stave. And this is when Scrooge wakes up the next morning and he's been redeemed. He's been saved by what the ghosts have shown him. And he vows to change his ways as a result of what he has seen, because he doesn't want Jacob Marley's fate. He doesn't want to be condemned to roam the earth for the rest of eternity. And he knows that if he acts now, he can be saved from what Jacob has shown him through the ghosts. The things that he does towards the end of this stave to show that he has changed are he sends an enormous turkey round to the Cratchits' house so that they're able to enjoy a really wonderful Christmas day with a lot more food than was seen in stave 3. And he also goes to Fred's house and asks if he can join the Christmas celebrations. So obviously, in contrast to the way Scrooge was shown right at the beginning in stave 1, we see that he's become a more generous person, a more sociable person, and a kinder person. And Scrooge promises to change his ways and live a more generous life. And he does that because obviously he wants to save his own life. He doesn't want to have to spend his afterlife making up for the bad things he did in life, but also because he realizes that it's generosity is part of being a good person, and that it's something that he needs to act on now to improve his own life, but also the lives of the people around him, and especially people like the Cratchits who rely on Scrooge for a wage. So, as I said at the beginning, very important to remember not to just, in your GCSE paper 1 for literature, not to just say this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Really important to link all of this to the context, but more particularly the themes and the characters in the novel. And like I said, these are things that we're going to cover over the next few weeks in future videos that are going to be made. So thank you for listening, everybody, and I hope you enjoyed it.